Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Have a great day.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark. I'm a member of Three Legacy Group, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Mark.
And thank you for that delicious story, Babel. Of course, I didn't tell you that what I was telling you in the green room there was all lies. But, it's one of the advantages of speaking first. I mean, we're debating on who was going to go first. We went back and forth, and I said, maybe Erin, you should go first, and I can follow up afterwards. And she kind of gave me the look, well, okay. And I said, well, my wife, if she says, well, okay, that means whatever your decision is, I'll follow, right? And the advantage of me going first is, we save the best message for last. That's what I'm looking for. I want to hear that message for you, right? A little closer? That better? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I haven't had a drink since June 4th, 2004. And for that, I'm extremely grateful, right? Now, I hope you noticed you heard me say I had my first drink, or I had my last drink. I didn't say I was sober from 2004, right? I went through the next 6 years in uncontrolled alcoholism without a drop of alcohol in my system, right? I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, not because I wanted to, but because it was kind of a situation that I was basically told that I had to come into it, right? I didn't realize that my self-will was so strong. I didn't realize the things that I was doing was creating so many problems. But when I did come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I came in because I needed to, right? And it was interesting when I was sitting there in the first meeting that I went to. Everyone's going around introducing themselves, and they're saying, I'm Betty, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Jim, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Mary, I'm an alcoholic. And it came up to me, and I couldn't lift my head up. All as I said is, my name is Mark, and I don't know what I am. I'm just scared. And as we go through, they talk about, what we have to do. Read the big book, get a home group, get a sponsor, work the steps. And when it came to reading the big book, I'm not a reader, right? I don't read books and stuff like that. I read, executive summaries, manuals, reports, instructions, stuff like that. I read for information, not for pleasure. And so when I saw the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was looking at it and I'm saying, okay, everyone's going through the steps, and I'm reading them, and I go, okay, look at all of these great steps. And this is how my mind works, right? Because I'm efficient. I could probably reduce this thing down. And so I said, okay, admit you're an alcoholic, believe in a God, make a confession, say sorry to other people, and go and help others. And I closed the book and I said, okay, I got this program. Okay? And so I went around to all the people that I owed amends to, and I said, hi, I'm Mark, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm really sorry for all the crap I've done. Can we call it even? And by the way, I have this 12-step program that I can really help you with some of the challenges that you're dealing with. And so that's how I went about. You see, I didn't understand when I first came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous how beautifully simple our program is. But us alcoholics will complicate anything. You put 3 of us in a room and we'll come up with 5 different ways to boil water. That's how we are. And so when I started going through it and further on in the program, I started realizing that it is laid out so beautifully for us. Step 1 tells us our problem. Steps 2 and 3 tells us the solution. 4 through 9 tells us how to get the solution. And 10 and 11 to 12 tells us how to keep the solution. And that's how our program is laid out. Isn't it basic and simple? And yet we still have a problem with that. You see, I had a problem with that, right? See, I was driven by self-will. And it comes naturally from me because my upbringing was along the lines like this. My father came over from Europe after the Second World War, and he's one of the people that were in the concentration camps. And you want to talk about somebody that has a lot of trauma, right? He showed up in Canada with 37 cents in one hand and a suitcase in another, right? My mother was raised in eastern Ontario on the farms, and she was raised by her aunt and uncle because her mother died due to complications of childbirth, and her father didn't have the emotional strength to raise her. So she was raised by her aunt and uncle, and by 14 years old, she was out on her own. And I asked her, well, why were you out on your own at 14? She goes, that's just how it was. That's how we dealt with it. And the reason why I bring this is because the motto in our household was this: you worked hard, played hard, be grateful for what you have, and don't complain because there's someone else worse off than you. Right? Pull up your bootstraps. Nothing gets given to you. You got to work for it. Make sure you're working, whatever it is. Don't complain about things. And I remember my mom saying that to me. And I finally said to her, I said, Mom, based on that criteria, I found there's only one person's allowed to complain in this world, because if someone's worse off than you, you're finally going to get down to the last person. Right? And I said, that doesn't make any sense. And what her answer was, don't complain. So at an early age, I understood that in order for me to do what I needed to do, I had to do it on my own. Right? So I had to pull on my bootstraps and get out there and start working and doing it. Right? And that is where my self-will started coming in. You see, because I believe that if I was to do what I was supposed to do and work hard and carried on with things, then I would achieve the goals that I want to. And when I achieved those goals that I wanted to, I'd be happy. So I started doing that, and I started acquiring stuff. I got the cars, the motorcycles, the boats, snowmobiles, all those other fun toys. I thought that made me happy. Then I got myself a nice house and all the stuff that goes around it. I thought that made me happy. I got the job, I got the career, I got the position, I got the company. I thought that would make me happy. I'd have the wife, the kids, relationships, that would make me happy. You see, I achieved every one of those things, but I wasn't happy. Right? I won't say that I wasn't happy, because I enjoyed the materialistic things of them all, but that didn't last long. And as soon as one faded away, I just go to the other one, and I just go to the other one. And what my solution was, I'm just not trying hard enough. I got to dig deeper. Right? And we all got what I call that kind of dull ache that sits around this area of our chest. It's like a concrete cylinder block that's sitting right on our chest. And it's that heavy weight that's on you all the time, and it just doesn't go away. And the only thing that took that away from me was a drink. And when I took that drink, it just went, whoosh, gone. Right? I remember the first time I felt the effects of alcohol, 14 years old around the campfire. And that night, after having a few drinks, all of a sudden everything went quiet in my head. I never knew it was so noisy up there until I actually went quiet. And once I achieved that quietness, I wanted to have it more and more. And so from that day forward, I spent the next 30 years chasing that feeling. And honest to God, I was living my life like it was a cross between a beer commercial and a Cheech and Chong movie. And it was nonstop fun. But what I didn't realize, it was my self-will that was driving it. And so when I did finally come into Alcoholics Anonymous, I started realizing that the way I was living before isn't working, because if it was working, I'd be okay right now. Now, it's interesting on our steps where it has steps 2 and 3, Steps 2, came to believe a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. I have no problem at all believing in a power greater than ourselves. And I can say this to anyone in here. You want to see a power greater than yourself? Lay down at night and look up the sky. No human created that. No human did. Obviously, something's bigger than that. And that power I refer to as God. I do that because of 2 basic reasons. Number 1 is 3 letters and 2 syllables. Right? Simple to remember. And number 2, in all reality, there is only one God. There can't be 5 or 6 gods out there. There's one. How we relate to that God on a personal level is as individual and as diverse as all of us. So when they talk about a God of our understanding, that God is the same God, but of our understanding is how do we relate to it. Now, I didn't know that when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I just thought, okay, yeah, there's a God up there. I know that. I can see it every day. And the second part, or step 3, was, turn our will over to that? Like, how do you do that? How do you turn your will over to a power that you really don't know, that you don't have a personal relationship with? And that's what I hope that I can try and talk about this afternoon, is how do we get to that connection to it, right? The way all of us get to that connection is when we bottom out, is when we hit that pit, when we stop digging. That's when we start to get that relationship, because at that point we don't have our self-will anymore. And that's what I started to do. Through those 6 years between the time I stopped drinking and I finally realized I had to do something, I lost everything. Got a divorce, lost my house, lost the respect of my kids, lost all the stuff, had 3 companies, blew them all up. I had nothing. And it wasn't until that point that I realized, well, obviously trying to dig in harder isn't going to work, because I was at the point where I couldn't dig anymore. I couldn't do it anymore. So I finally surrendered. And in the process of surrendering, I came back into Alcoholics Anonymous, because I was kind of just floating around and having my toes stuck in there. And when I came into this rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I looked around, so what am I supposed to do? Work the steps. How do I do that? Get a sponsor. And that's what I did. And I got a sponsor, has a far better program than I ever had, solid program. And we started going through the books, 1 page at a time, 1 paragraph at a time, 1 chapter at a time. And as I'm going through it, I'm starting to get a relationship with what this power is. And I'm starting to reach out to it, but I still don't have that understanding of a concept of turning my will over to it. And as I'm going through, I'm tripping, I'm falling down, I'm getting back up, I'm brushing my knees off, I'm trying a little bit more. But I guess I didn't fall down enough. And sure enough, you get yourself into another situation in life that comes at you, and it gets worse again. And so as I'm digging through again, what am I forgetting to do? I'm forgetting to reach out, forgetting to get that conscious contact with God as I understood Him, right? And it got itself to the point again where I'm driving down the road, and I'm angry. I'm really, really angry. I'm mad. And I'm mad at God. And I'm yelling at God. I'm cursing at God. I'm swearing at Him. And I said, you got to do something about this because I can't do it anymore. I'm not the brightest person around here. You got to get this big neon sign and say, Mark, this is what you have to do right here, right now. Here it is. Do this. You'll be fine. You have to point it out to me like that. And if you don't point it out to me like that, forget it. You and I are done. I don't want to have anything to do with it. You can go pound sand. Right? Not even 5 minutes later, I get a phone call. And it's a lady in our group who has a really powerful spiritual connection. And she says to me, she goes, hey, Mark, how you doing? For some reason, I don't know why, but I'm supposed to call you. Are you okay? Oh, even today, the hairs on the back of my neck still stands up. I stopped. I said, okay, I get it. Thank you. Thank you. And that's where I started my journey on the spiritual path. I started reading the big book and looking at it under a sense of spiritual direction. And it is so clear-cut. It's so black and white. It's right there in front of us. And I've read that book how many times? How come I didn't see it before? Because my self-will was blocking me. See, how am I supposed to trust this thing that I don't have a relationship with? How am I supposed to trust this thing? How am I supposed to turn a will over when that will is what kept me alive and kept me going? That is bloody scary. But I had no choice, because the other alternative was to go back out again. And I knew if I went back out, I ain't coming back in. I just knew that. And it wouldn't be going out for a drink. It would be just going out to oblivion. So I had no choice. And I finally got to self where I can start working on it. And that's what I started to do. And I started looking what the program was telling me. And one of the things that the program told me, and we hear it, is continue your spiritual growth outside of AA. I don't care what kind of a spiritual path you're on, whether it is a structural path, whether it's a religious path, whether it's whatever kind of path, but our program is just but a beginning. Let's start looking out in other avenues. But make sure, and this is what Katie said last night. By the way, anybody hear Katie last night? Wow. Wow, that was fantastic. And Katie said something that I resonate with. It's fantastic to go out and search for other spiritual ways, but do not use that to replace Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? Because if it was a matter of just finding a spiritual path, we wouldn't have rabbis, priests, or ministers in our program, would we? We need AA, and AA is our foundation. AA is my foundation. But the combination of that and growing along other spiritual means started me to start getting things better. I started sleeping better at night. The miracles started to happen as we talk about the program, right? You know, we hear them all the time. People come into rooms saying, you know, I haven't had a drink in 6 months, and in that 6 months I haven't been in jail, right? Haven't been pulled over, haven't had an arrest. We're doing pretty good, right? I was actually heard one person share in a room one time, and it just brought tears to my eyes. He says, you know what? This weekend I'll have 3 years, and I'm allowed to see my daughter without supervision. You see, that's the miracles that we have in our program, and that's the miracles that I started seeing happening to me. I decided that I was going to turn it over to God regardless of what was going on. And I'll tell you, when you turn it over, it's scary. The fears come back. Well, what do you mean I'm not in control? What am I supposed to do? What happens if I don't do what I think I should do? How am I going to trust this? Well, just do it. Just do it, because when you do it, you'll see the results. I promise you those results will happen. And when those results start to happening, things start to get better. A little bit each day at a time. A little bit each day at a time. And then you start realizing that things are going okay. And I started to do that. I started up another business, and the business is going good. And the interesting thing about my business, and this is no word of a lie, I don't own my company. God owns my company. I work for God. And every morning, we have an office meeting. And I said, okay, God, what am I supposed to do today? And then I get the list of what I have to do today, and I do it. And it just happens to work out. And then the other thing is that when I start grabbing onto the reins and I said, okay, things are going good, I should dig in and get more, things start to go a little south. Right? And I said, okay, wait a sec. I know what my problem is. I have to, restructure and reschedule, make sure everything is going the way that I want it to do. And, there's 24 hours a day, so let's make sure that 24 hours a day is properly filled. Except I don't know, the problem is I put 26 hours a day into a 24-hour day. And within the snap of a finger, things start going sideways again. And then it starts affecting my health. It starts affecting my way my spiritual growth is. I stop doing the readings I'm supposed to do in the mornings. I stop my meditation time in the mornings. Steps 11 and 12 tells us exactly what to do, doesn't it? Right? 10, 11, 12 tells us how to realize and keep working the program. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. That means what I got to do is sit down and shut up. Get quiet. I don't do quiet well. I get quiet, my head starts getting noisy. But if I do it long enough, it does shut up long enough that I start hearing what I'm supposed to be doing. Right? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. Praying only for the knowledge of His will for us. Not my will, His will for us, and the power to carry that out. And then step 12 sums it all up for it, doesn't it? Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So if you haven't had a spiritual awakening or a spiritual connection, get back into the steps, because that's where the answer is. Talk to your sponsor about it. Start working through it. Start doing the inventories again, and then you'll start getting that experience. And once you have that experience, what do? Think of the alcoholic who still suffers. And then the last line of that, the most important line as far as I'm concerned in our big book of anything out there, we practice these principles in all our affairs. That means everything. That means my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids, my relationship with the people I work with my friends, in all our affairs. When in doubt, get quiet. Listen to what God has to say to you. God can, if He were sought. I mean, we can listen to this and quote it all the time. It's all in the big book. All we have to do is be willing and have a willingness to listen to what He has to say to us. And when I start doing that, my life gets good. I'm trying to retire now. I want to retire, but I'm not. I know I'll never retire because my wife says if you retire tomorrow, in 2 weeks, you're going to start up another business and forget. We're not going to go through that, okay? But I know that I'm ready to retire. But I got to do it on God's time, not on my time. Right? I got to slow down and let things happen. Because when I don't, I hurt myself. And when I hurt myself, I get forced to slow down. Right? I'm like a 3-year-old that has a temper tantrum. Right? I stomp my feet and I hold my breath and I want it this way, me, and I'm yelling and screaming. And my dad's sitting there going, pat me, okay, it's all right. And then, 2 minutes later, I'm hopping up on his lap and saying, I need help. My dad is God. Right? I still have a temper tantrum with him. I speak honestly with him. It's like 2 good friends sitting on a park bench having a talk. I yell at God. I get angry at God. I curse at God. Because I'm scared. And He knows that. But He's always there for me, 100%. And the evidence is there, left, right, and center. And I see it absolutely every day of my life, if I am willing to open my eyes up and see it. And generally speaking, it's always there. My life today is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. My wife and I were on the subway yesterday, and we're talking about, how we have this relationship. And I said to her, could you imagine 20, 30 years ago, we would be where we are today? And she goes, not in a million years. Not in a million years. See, the relationship with God and I are beautiful. I always close this with this statement, no matter where I'm talking or what I'm talking about. Happened about, I guess, back in 2007. My wife and I went to Buffalo to see B.B. King. A great blues player, man. Oh, he was 82 years old sitting on his stool and had Lucille, his guitar, and he's just magical, right? And partway through the concert, he was saying to the people there, he says, guys, you got to love the women. You got to respect the women. You got to be kind to the women. Because they're just angels that haven't sprouted their wings yet. And all the ladies were just, isn't that beautiful? And all the guys were squirming. And after the concert, my wife was in line up to the bathroom, and she says there was a lady behind her, a black lady, and she says she was just majestic. Statuesque is how she described her. She's just beautiful, beautiful lady. And this lady said to her, you know what, Bibi, he's right. Men got to learn to respect us, ladies. You know what I'm talking about there, girlfriend? You see, I come on home, I got to do the cooking, I got to clean, I got to get the kids ready. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, my husband, he come on home and he sit down in the chair and he has himself a bottle of beer. And my wife goes, well, actually, if my husband comes home first, he cooks and I'll clean up. Or if I come home first, I'll cook and he'll clean up. And if I'm not well, he'll do both. And she goes, girlfriend, you got a gift from God. And when she said that, I got a little bit of a smile on my face, and I looked down. I go, what a beautiful thing to say, right? You're a gift from God for me as I'm a gift for God to you. And I, honest to God, I look out this packed standing room only room, and I'm so humbled by it, that all of you are a gift of God for me. And hopefully my message that I shared to you today will be a little bit of a gift from God for you. So may the God of your understanding give you this precious gift of another 24 hours of sobriety. Thank you so much. I'm blessed.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm an alcoholic. The energy in this room today is so beautiful and fantastic, and the laughter is so incredibly healing. I don't know of any other place where I get to go and experience the joy and peace and calm that comes from people who understand what the depths of pain in my soul feel like. And if that is not the presence of God in the possibility of recovery and healing that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous offers us, and the power of what happens when one alcoholic talks to another, I don't know what is. So I don't know how to follow up Mark. I'm not quite as funny. And I'm glad that I got to sit with that and that he offered to go first, because that laughter also soothes my nervous system. Right? It soothes that part of me that is nervous, that part of me that when I feel fear triggers my nervous system, right? That fight or flight, freeze, fawn, copulate, but with an F instinct that I know I'm not the only person in the room has, right? And so my part of the story, and I'm glad because this ties in so beautifully together with what Mark talks about, is just what that has looked like in my life, what that has looked like in my sobriety, and what happens in us and in me specifically, because my story is not remarkable, and how we deal with fear and God and what that spirituality is actually like. So I am not your AA speaker today. That is so grateful to be at the front of the room. This is a very vulnerable piece of me that I'm offering you today, and so thank you for having me. So I am the oldest of 5 kids. I grew up in a super duper Roman Catholic family with really young parents. We went to church a lot, and my first experience with a power greater than myself and God was based in fear and shame. And in particular for me, we had a priest who had just come back from the Vietnam War, who was clearly in a state of PTSD, who would try and talk about God and the Viet Cong hanging from trees, right? And so my first concept of God was that I was bad, that I had to be super duper good, and that it was my job to sort of placate everything in my family that was chaotic and dysfunctional. And there was a lot of love there. My parents did the best they could, and they, have stuff that came from their parents and on through the years. But I remember very consciously at a very young age, silencing myself, right? And making myself smaller and trying to control with my will, people, places, and things around me, right? And that somehow that was my responsibility. So when I got to 13 and I had my first drink of alcohol, I was a blackout drinker from the beginning. And what I loved about it and what it did for me is it stopped everything in my head and I felt okay. Right? And all of that deep inner fear and self-loathing and feeling like I didn't belong was peaceful. Right? And who wouldn't want that? Right? I also didn't know what blackouts were, and, but it stopped. But it literally stopped everything that was going on inside of me. And I had, I was very functional. I learned how to overperform in other areas of my life, right? I would not show you the true reflection of how fearful I was. So I could seem very confident. I was very capable, but there was this disconnect of the person I presented to the world and what was truly going on inside. Right? And my parents stopped going to church when I was about 12 years old and exposed us to a lot of different religions and spiritualities, which was fantastic. And when I was about 14 years old, I got sent up north to go to a canoe camp. And lying out under the stars for the first time truly, and I had felt this at different periods when I was younger, but that feeling of being one and whole and loved, I felt when I'm in nature, right? And I had never felt that in a church. So it started this process in me of seeking, right? I wanted more of that feeling, and yet the only thing that I could do that caused the instant gratification of getting that peace inside me was alcohol. Right? So I had this sort of schizophrenic relationship with knowing that I was missing something internally, knowing that it needed to be something greater than I was, and my relationship with alcohol. So I finished high school. I had met some people who were part of a spiritual from a reserve in Manitoba. There was a woman there who was a paraplegic who traveled with the young people's group, and they invited me to participate and go and live with them on the reserve, and I left Toronto and I ended up on this very small reserve in Manitoba, and it was a profound experience for me. And there were people on the reserve. It was lots of different things happening on the reserve. And when I first got there, I went out to a couple of bush parties and had some drinks. And I think I had 2 beers. I was still young, but I was stumbling around for some reason. And so I got a nickname, 2 Beers, which followed me for a long time. And here's where my arrogance comes in, right? And here's where my self-will comes in, and here's where my self-reliance comes in. I decided that I wasn't going to drink because I didn't want to be part of anybody else's problem, right? So I lived on the reserve. I had incredibly profound experiences as I got this opportunity to travel around to a lot of different communities and participate in spiritual ceremonies. And at some point, I decided it was time for me to go to university. And I have this very conscious memory of when I went to university, I said, F it, and that I was going to drink, I was going to party, I was going to not be responsible and not be the caregiver for everyone around me. And that first week of university proved to me that I was an alcoholic. And it got progressively worse, and I will highlight my arrogance again, where I went to university, and it was back in the day when nothing was open on a Sunday. Right? So if you're a good alcoholic, you go, you get your 2-4, you bring it, and then if you're my kind of alcoholic, you have a fake AA meeting with a fake name, and you talk about your very real problems. Okay? So clearly belong in the rooms. I didn't graduate from university. I ended up at a treatment program that I chose because it had nothing to do with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I wanted nothing to do with you. And because I wanted nothing to do with God. So I tried some CAMH stuff. I started drinking about 2 weeks after I got out of rehab, and the next 9 months were the darkest point of my life. And they had exposed us to a couple of AA meetings while I was in my treatment program, and I remember, and I'm grateful for that, is that they said if you didn't go to AA, your likelihoods of getting and staying sober were slim, next to none. And I was at a point where I was praying to God that in my blackouts at night, that I would just die in my sleep. And a moment of clarity happened. I woke up on my parents' floor. I hadn't graduated from university. I was unemployable. I was drinking every day. The shame and guilt and self-hate I had was enormous. And I woke up one day on the floor and I had a moment of clarity, and I realized that I could live for a super long time, and that I was willing to go to any lengths to stay in that state. And I went to an AA meeting that night, and I heard a speaker whose story doesn't reflect mine in any way whatsoever, but I knew he was telling my story. And I knew that he didn't look anything like me on the outside, but that he understood my pain, and he gave me hope, and he told me that I didn't have to live that way anymore, and I believed him. That was not my sober date. My sober date is January 30th of the year 2000, and the only reason, because in the rooms, I thought that God was going to work I knew God was going to work for you, but I didn't believe that God was going to work for me. And it wasn't until an old timer came up to me and said, you know, Erin, the program works better if you don't drink. Okay. My self-will is very special. But the amount of fear I had, truly the amount of fear and the terror that I felt in that God believed in everybody else except for me, was palpable. And I remember turning it all over to God that night, and I haven't picked up a drink since. Now, I came in, I was taken through the book, I did all of the do things, wonderful things happened. I started to develop and learn how to have rhythm and routine and discipline, which is, I hate, and is incredibly important, and the only way that has taught me how to stay sober and to develop a relationship with God. I want it to be a magic wand that's going to happen, that I'm going to put a small amount of time into and get all of the rewards out of. Okay, if we're being honest. My ego really wants to be the supernatural, powerful AA speaker that's super spiritual. I am not that person, right? That is what I want. That is what my will wants. And so I went through the steps, and I was taken line by line, paragraph by paragraph, to make sure I understood, because I like to read something and then interpret it my way, redefine it, and then decide how it's going to apply to my life. Okay? Which is not helpful. So, asking me if I understood certain words, what they meant in this context, was actually important, because I am going to hear and see and do what I want when I'm left to my own devices. Right? Take what you want for me and leave the rest is not applicable. I cannot do part of the program. Okay? Half measures for me result in half measures in my life. Okay? I hear sometimes in the rooms, people stand up at the front of the podium and talk about how their spiritual life transfers into their material or physical life. I got this. I did this. I have a house. I have these children. I have this stuff. And at a certain point of my sobriety, I did think that if I did it properly, God was going to reward me. Okay? I did. I married on AA campus, and that turned out a certain way. I have, okay, I like 2.5 years sober. I have 3 amazing, beautiful children that I have been blessed with that are the light of my life and pure God. And I have had times in sobriety where I am right in the middle, and I have had times in sobriety where I am in the wilderness, no matter how much time I have, and I feel like I am alone again. And that is a hard, scary place to be. And what has happened for me in my alcoholism and in my recovery, and some of what I've observed around the rooms, is when I was taken through my first, fourth, and then subsequent ones, we spent a lot of time on resentments, which I understand thoroughly and can recite ad nauseum in my sleep, and very little time on fear, right? Write a list. And I got to a place in my sobriety, so in about 2015, something happened at one of my children's schools. We had to leave the city. I am married to one of us. He relapsed at that time. I did not know about it. And for the next 3 or 4 years was an incredible amount of chaos and drama and trauma, and my relationship with God started to change. And it was this incremental change that I wasn't paying enough attention to in hindsight, but it were these little shifts of not being rigorously honest with you or with myself. Right? The spiritual principles that underpin my spirituality and my relationship with God, I started to let slide. I need absolutes. I'm either honest or I'm not, right? Rigorous honesty is something that needs to be explained to me, right? I'm either hopeful or I've given up hope, right? And I need to live in that place. And so, long story short, there was this incremental process. There was a lot of trauma caused on the outside that I was powerless over, and then there was a lot of drama that I absolutely responsible for. And so I ended up divorcing him with 3 kids, no job in Haliburton County that has no good AA, and the pandemic hit. Okay. So this incremental thing, I don't know if you've ever heard the parable of the frog, right? Like the water starts to heat up slowly, right? If you throw a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you put a frog into water and then slowly, incrementally turn the water up, the frog will actually stay in the pot and boil itself to death. Okay? And so I use that parable just because it keeps it short and it's something super easy to remember. But I was back in a place where my will and my self-reliance were trying to run the show. Right? How could God not want my marriage to survive? Was that not God's will? Is leaving him abandoning God or abandoning my children? Is me abandoning myself what God wants? Right? And I got into a place when my nervous system is kicked up from all of those triggers, freeze, fight, flight, fawn, and the other one. It's super easy for me to go into overcompensating because then it's my will and I'm running the show and I don't trust God at that point because I do have expectations about what my life is supposed to look like. And I grew away from God. And I got to a point in my sobriety where I didn't want to pick up a drink, but I didn't want to live. At about 22 years sober. And when I say I didn't want to live, it was like the ideation was happening and I was terrified. And thankfully, the humility and my arrogance was keeping me out of the rooms. How can you be that person? The shame and judgment of, oh, you're not working your program. Oh, at 22 years sober, this shouldn't be happening to you. You shouldn't be in this place. All of that stuff and what happens in my brain when I take that and run. And thankfully, the humility that the program has taught me, and I knew that even though I felt lost in the wilderness without God, that God hadn't brought me to this place to abandon me. And I knew that I had to go back to basics. And I knew that, and a woman in my home group at the time, I've always been drawn to people in AA who don't do the tropes, who don't do the one-offs, who don't just hide in the safety of one story, one time, and don't relate it to their days. And this woman said she was going to do a big book study, and it was going to be like 30 weeks, and did I want to do it? And nothing inside me said I wanted to do it, and I knew I had to do it. And I did it, and I didn't get here out of virtue, I got here out of desperation. And at 22 years sober, I was given the gift of desperation again. And I was willing to put aside everything I thought I knew about AA. I thought I knew about God. I thought I knew about my home group. And like at that point, I was living in personalities over principles. And I put it all away, and I came back as a newcomer. And there is something so beautiful about being given that gift of desperation again, stone cold sober. Having lived all of the bedevilments out when I was drinking, and stone cold sober in the rooms. And it ended up being 7 of us. There were 4 of us who had over 18 years of sobriety, and then 3 newcomers. And thank God, like I feel like I've been living in a prayer for 14 months with these women. And we ended up doing like the most thorough big book study. And what was brilliant about this big book study is that it offered considerations in a way that I have never had to look at in my sobriety. And it, on paper, said and made me consider my relationship with the work in the book and my relationship with God, the yeah buts that I do in the rooms. Right? And we don't talk about that. And all of a sudden, it was like all these yeah buts that I've gathered over 24 years were written on paper in front of me, and we were talking about it. Right? And we got to talk about how you can have a relationship with your higher power, and then are there places and areas in your life where you are agnostic, where self-will still runs riot, where you don't give it over to God, where you are not trusting, right? And we did our resentment list first, and then we did our fears. But we did our fears in a way where it asked us about what are self-defeating belief systems that still exist in you. What are those fears that you don't tell the other people in your room on a Thursday night when you're having coffee? They might come up in the parking lot discussions, or maybe occasionally with your sponsor, but in your soul, what are those fears about? And being able to have an honest conversation and then apply that to my relationship with God and to the spiritual principles in the room have turned my heart lights back on. Right? So if you are at any place in your sobriety, you know, if you're brand new and struggling, if you're 7 years in, if you're 12 years in, you are not alone. There is no shame. You are just as much a part of, and sometimes God calls us to walk through the pain in order to teach us and bring us closer to Him. Thank you for my sobriety.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 to a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.